Hey everyone, welcome to the Parts Girl podcast. I have Chuck Hartle here with me for a special interview on what is going on with CDK. Well, more so what to do when CDK comes back on, because we want to make sure we're providing support to our parts managers because right now is just a chaotic time. So thank you, Chuck, for taking the time.
You betcha.
So we are getting inundated with our clients, asking when, we've kind of gone through figuring out what to do now as the outage has happened. But the most important thing is when it goes back on, what are some things that parts managers should first, like number one thing, I'm a parts manager, what should I do first as soon as CDK comes back on?
Well, hopefully, while they're working now, and I think most of them have, is they've recorded their part sales either through they had a bunch of handwrite repair orders and counter tickets to add everything in. Now they're going to turn around and try and get them entered back into the CDK system. So getting that organized, getting the right people in place, the coordination between service and parts is going to be the biggie. Service has to build the repair orders and the labor types, and now parts has to go in behind it to add the parts so they can get them closed. The counter tickets, hopefully they've got records of counter tickets and they should be easy to recreate. Hoping that if you haven't thought about it yet, you're working on it now, which we've had some clients reach out to us in the last couple of days about it. Exactly this is receipts. Okay, how do I get all of these receipts back in the system? If you've kept a spreadsheet with order number, part number, quantity that you purchased, then it's a matter of going into TO. PO is by far the best function to use. A lot of people never even knew it existed. It's an old way, talking to an old guy like me. This is the way back in the early 80s. This is the way we created orders in CDK. It was through function PO, post orders. And it's really easy to go in there and put a date, an order number, and an order type. And now you put part number quantity, part number quantity, part number quantity, all the way down. When you're done, just hit enter, go out of the program, go into RA, receipt and adjust, and mass receipt the order in. That'd be the fastest, quickest way to do it. Hopefully everybody has that organized. Probably the one thing you want to pay attention to is, especially on your customer orders, you've had parts that were not on your inventory, and now you special ordered them and sold them to a customer because you special ordered them. Well, those are going to be the parts that, oops, got to stop, go back, add the parts in, now go receipt them to get them back. I've had some people say, do I need to receipt everything first before I sell? Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
That was going to be my first question is like, what can you do it in a wrong order? Like, is there anything that you
Well, personally, as long as you let the system go negative, it doesn't matter who, what, when, where, or how, because some of them will go negative. But quite honestly, just doing it at the same time, having one person posting in the receipts and other people making the counter tickets or whatnot, you can coincide and, if they do go negative on hand, before you receipt it, when you receipt it in, it's going to fix it. So you're not having a right or a wrong. If anything, I'd say, don't wait to put all the receipts in before you start making tickets. Okay. The whole key is getting caught up. After you finish this daunting process, and the longer it's closed down, the worse it is, of course, because the more days you have. But once you do get this down and get it all input back in, now you want to go back and make sure that everything that you had got entered into the system. Now, you're going to have a really big day end when you go and add 8 days worth of information, counter tickets, repair orders added and closed. You're going to have a really big day.
And so my question is, they don't need to do this all in one day. So as soon as it gets back on, they don't have to get it all entered in one day, or should they?
Ideally, I don't think there's a parts manager on the planet that wouldn't like to get it all done in one day. But more than likely, this is going to happen over a series of 2 or 3 days, to be realistic. The larger the operation, the more daunting the task, So If I recommended anything, I would say, because you're also continuing to sell parts. Even when you come back online, yay, we get to start ordering the way we used to. So you want your people to make sure they're still taking care of current sales, but maybe isolating a couple of people and that's their full-time job until you get caught up, would be prudent.
Yeah, and I think this has definitely been a wake-up call for the industry because this type of thing hasn't really happened.
Well,
People are,
we
yeah,
all got lulled into convenience. 25, 30 years ago, we were on ADP at that time in the dealership I worked at, and we had to have a catastrophic backup because their DMS system, they used to have these old Winchester drives. Their floppy disks were huge. They were this big round disk, and we had 3 drawers with them in them, and they were constantly, they'd go down or we'd back up the system. And so we always had several boxes of handwrite tickets and repair orders because we were used to it. We always had an inventory pad that we ran once a week, a printout, kind of what I would call a catastrophic backup. But, when you think about it, CDK now, and talking with several clients, they actually ran inventory pads into their DSDA archive. Sounds prudent, good. But if you can't get into the DSDA on CDK, you can't pull up the pad. Having a copy of an inventory off-site, a copy of your customer list, especially your wholesale customer list, off on a separate drive, your price code, your matrix. If everybody would have thought to have that separately than in the CDK archives, such as PDA and whatnot, it would have been a little easier to take care of. But unfortunately, this day and age, they got these great archive programs, but they're embedded within the program. And if you can't get CDK up to get to them, you're dead.
yeah.
So that's been the problem.
Yeah, and I think that there's going to be some process changes and new ways of looking at this because when I was talking to people, it's almost like, preparing or having a plan for emergency in your home, like a fire, growing up in California, wildfires all the time. You have your, emergency bucket of things. And, I even said if you have land, you have goats, kind of, those are like your cybersecurity people fighting, defending, because it's not like a thing that's just going to go away. It's going to be constant defense mode of this. So having that plan so that you can still continue business as best.
Well, just remember, okay, this is CDK.
Yeah.
But if I were a Reynolds or a Dealer Track client, yay, the good news is you guys are up. But I'll tell you, I'd be the first ones, if I were you, looking at, let's see what happened here and make sure we keep a copy of our customer control numbers and price codes and a parts pad separate from the DMS so that, and you only have to do it once a month, most of it, maybe an inventory pad once a week, but customer lists, price codes and whatnot once a month. And I don't care what DMS you're on, that would be something very prudent to have somewhere separate so you're not completely relying on the DMS to pull that up.
Yeah. And what would you say that, like, the effects of this, like I'm just talking about parts because as an industry, we're going to feel this kind of for a while, a long time. But in parts perspective, how long do you feel like is a parts manager going to feel this in their numbers, in their inventory? So, like, how long will it take for them to recover from this? Just
Not long. They're resilient. They'll get the system back up and working in a couple of weeks. Once you get it back up, if anything, this is going to trigger some of the more prudent parts managers to start doing some bin cycle counts. Okay, we've put all the receipts in. We've got all the tickets back in. Everything's up and going. For this month end now, it looks like this is going to be down until July 1st. So what do you do for month end? Talking with a couple of managers already, they've been forward thinking. They're looking at the average that they paid, their employees, especially if they're commissioned, they're going to pay them an average to at least get through that. Then they'll worry about working it backwards and all that after they get it back up. To me, it's kind of like right now, everybody's already adjusted. It's been, you know, 10 working days basically that they've been not able to get in. And so they've adjusted to tracking things so they can get it back in. But there's going to be those points where maybe you miss something, and maybe the inventory counts don't seem as accurate as they were before. And that's where I think when you interview Mark Payne as part of this process from an inventory aspect, balancing out the receipts and starting to do some cycle counts, that would be very prudent. So I'm going to tell you a month to get back to where you feel comfortable again.
Yeah, and then what if, you're back and comfortable and you start seeing the numbers kind of go sideways and things like, what would you recommend to look at if you feel like, it's not
Go back and that's a good question. Go back and look at your manual process. One of the things, if anything, once you get through all of this, now coming up with what did we do right? What did we do wrong?
Yeah.
What can we improve and implement and train on that process in case it ever happens again?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can sit and go, ha ha, CDK, boy, they got hit. But I'll tell you what, if I was at a DMS company, a dealer tracker, a Reynolds, or a PBS, believe me, I would be looking at, hey, this could happen to us very quickly. If you're on the internet, the chances of it happening with large companies is substantial. You can tie up and have all the security in the world, and I'm going to pretty much bet you that CDK had some pretty darn good security, and it still got hacked.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, this is kind of a wake-up call, and that's where learning from this, especially the CDK dealers, they're going to be able to put together a process for if it ever happens again and be better for it. I personally believe CDK will come out of this stronger and better than they ever were. I've heard this history through so many different corporations that had a problem, cybersecurity, or food companies that had, botulism or something like that, or E. coli, and their processes improved that much more and they become that much stronger of a company. Maybe they were a little lax at that point, but I firmly believe CDK will not have this happen again. They'll have the things in place to make sure it's done.
I completely agree. And I think looking at the dealers too, if you think about all kind of like the newer people in the industry coming in, I bet you they learned a lot more in the last 10 days than they would have ever learned in the last, year of manually doing things. Because you learn so much more when you manually do things than it being automated. And
right. And see, that's like old school me. When I first got into the industry, and this dates me, okay, everybody, I'm 68 years old, okay? Well, 67, on the backside of 67. But with that being said, when I first got into this industry, the first inventory I ever worked with, we were on a card file. We had 3x5 cards, and they were all organized, and, we'd have bin locations, and we'd put all the part number cards in there, and as we sold them, every night after we sold parts and had requisition forms, we pulled up the cards, sold it out, and that's how we figured out what to put in inventory. Mm-hmm. Everything was done manually. Yeah. I remember, when Cars Dynatron came out, they were the first ones that had some sort of automation where they key punched up all your card file and put it in the system with bin location, description, cost, and whatnot. And you used to take your requisitions and go through that pad and put red check marks next to it. You mailed it in, they cut a stock order and sent you a new pad, and that was like once every 2 weeks. And, then all of a sudden, the minute, the first DMS system I ever went on was CDK. And we thought, oh my gosh, the world has just changed, And as things have evolved with efficiencies and processes, we all got lulled into the fact that, how could you, this will never fail. Wrong. Now we know it can, it's part of the process. And just to have some historical offsite information, encrypted and at the dealership in a file or whatnot, is going to be very prudent for if it goes down again, you can very quickly bring it back up. I mean, with some of our clients on CDK, we don't collect customer information, but we collect part number pads every day. And we were able to, get a part number pad with part number description bin and on hand at least, and cost to get that to them so that they could find parts. So many dealerships, I'm imagining a large dealership that didn't have that, you got to go by memory and try and figure out where it is. And at least that part of the process, I know other dealerships, and I thought, remember, they're a resourceful group. They could get onto their DCS system like NNA with Nissan or Global Connect or Dealer Connect or FMC Dealer or CCC, if you had CCC, and you could actually look up your parts and what the locations were. They found ways to find that information. But wouldn't it really be nice to have a pad in an Excel format that you could hand off to all your counter people and they could do the searches? So those are the types of things, thinking forward. Recovering is one thing. Thinking forward, being prepared in case it happens, is going to be a big deal now. It's going to be at the forefront where it wasn't for 10 years, Nobody thought about, wow, do I need a catastrophic off-site copy of everything? Well, it appears you do.
Yeah, it's a new norm now. Yeah. And it's something that now you just learn from. We always, like you said, you learn from it, you become stronger from it, and we'll, continue on.
Well, it's so ironic because with our company, as with other companies, and this was things that, questions we have from clients and from industry experts is Cliff, Cope, my business partner, and he's the technical end of this. We learned very quickly, everybody said, do you have a catastrophic plan? And we have two different places where we keep things. In case there's an earthquake in San Diego, having a catastrophic backup, two different servers, so if one goes online, we can come back up, and having those encrypted, and so it's kind of funny that from a business standpoint, a lot of companies such as us have these catastrophic backups in case a hard drive fails or whatnot, technology-wise. But now it turns out in the industry, you need to have a catastrophic backup at the dealership level as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and to your point too, there are natural disaster things that happen. You lose power. Having those plans, you still can somewhat do business if you can, if everyone's safe.
Powers, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes. Dealerships go through that and they lose power and whatnot. Sometimes, the dealership gets hit. Over the years, we've had a couple of dealerships that were destroyed in a tornado. One that flooded from Hurricane Katrina, that was underwater. So, they were out of business for, several months, and then all of a sudden, poof, up it needs to come again. The good news was that's where the DMS vendors had a backup, in their cloud. And so they could restore the DMS back to what it was before the flood, but, when you have a problem like this where the DMS vendor goes down and you don't have that offsite catastrophic backup, that's the plan that people need to start to work on to make sure that you can get through this. I saw one thing on LinkedIn that was really interesting, and it was Kia of Frisco. I'm assuming Frisco, Texas, and they had their whole sales staff out there. And they said, CDK didn't bring us down. We sold 42 cars today. And I thought that was really cool. And it just goes to show the resilience. You'll get through it. But I thought that was pretty interesting that, hey, we don't have a computer, but we still sold 42 cars.
Yeah.
And that's what you want to have going forward.
So that made me think of a question. Do you think that people's perspective, I'm just talking about the industry, are really going to change on technology? Because technology, if you look at the industry, it's already kind of hard to get dealerships to change and adopt some technology. We've come a long way, but do you think this is going to set us back and have this fear from technology even
No,
more?
not at all. It's kind of like thinking back 35 years ago when we had a failure. Everybody's tripping over each other to get to one inventory printout pad. Now, counter people, they still have their catalog, which was working. They're still able to get to their DCS to look up parts, or, if they're on, one of the cataloging systems like Snap-on. But they have a PC, and most of them have Excel and whatnot, office tools. So it's easy to give everybody a copy of the pad in Excel and a search function, so not everybody's tripping over everybody to get to the piece of paper, right? And I think technology-wise, that's where a lot of this has come forward. That's what a lot of the parts managers told us, hey, we get to give a copy to every counter person that we got, every parts advisor, so they can look up these parts and do a search, Whereas when we had catastrophic backups, we had to go to a pad and everybody was in line looking through the pad. And I remember I actually had one person, and the counter people would line up, and she would actually look up all the parts for them and give them the location. They'd write them down and go get them.
Oh.
So, that was way back when. But now that you have individual PCs, CDK might have been down, but you still had your PC with the catalog, and you had Excel that you could bring up. So I guess it just depends on how it evolves. You can't be afraid of technology and moving forward. Listen, I was the last person in the world to go on cataloging. When Bell and Howell came out with the first automated parts catalog, I bought these big expensive systems. I mean, they were huge. And I watched my counter people working on them, and they seemed to go slower than they did when they were looking it up on microfiche and in books. And, after 2 or 3 weeks on it, I wanted to turn this thing in because I spent a lot of money, for 10 counter people to have these machines. But I'll tell you what, after 6 weeks, they were, they had that learning curve and they learned it. They were 50 times faster in looking it up in a book or a microfiche. There was that learning curve. And, that's the type of thing that worrying about, to me, the biggest thing that can come out of this is we know it can happen now. If there's anything going backwards, it would only be that, hey, we have to make sure we keep some critical files somewhere at the dealership in a different computer that's protected, customer name files, wholesale, from a parts perspective, wholesale customers, price codes, matrix, part number pricing, those types of things, an inventory pad, at least once a month, put it out there. And that way, if it goes down, you've got it where you can bring it back up for everybody at least to look up a customer control number, write it down. That's one of the things we've had a lot of questions on. We never collected customer data. We collect inventory data, but so many of them will say, hey, you wouldn't happen to have a wholesale pad, so we have a control number and a customer name and a price code. So if I can help anybody out with that, that's one of the things you should do, because almost everybody has contacted us wanting that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all a learning process, and like you said, we'll be more resilient or not resilient. We'll be better. We'll come out better from this. So
CDK will come out better. Dealers will come out better. And again, anybody listening that doesn't happen to be a CDK client, your rentals or whatever, PBS, Dealer Track, Automate, I would say you better plan on the same thing as well. Nobody says that they're immune just because CDK got it, neener. If anything, it should be a wake-up call for the entire industry. And these type of catastrophic plans should be planned no matter what dealers or what DMS you're using.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you want to add before we go? Or I think that was very insightful. Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, maybe we do this again in a month, after we see everybody get back on and any improvements or processes that we can add to it.
Yeah, I like that. We'll do this again in a month as things go down. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. PartsEdge, the power tool for your parts department. We hope you're leaving feeling motivated, challenged, and inspired.